Hey, good afternoon. It's Rick here from 12 August. Little football talk today. And this is basically motivated, this conversation, by things I saw on football boards on Facebook. And I've joined a couple football boards. A lot of people like to compare different eras, which I think is actually quite foolhardy. Well, first of all, here, I'm not trying to make a comparison in general about what time periods are better. Hey, look, I've had that conversation before, and I explained why I believe I much prefer the old school football, especially prior to the free agency and salary cap. That's just me. I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and I really like that football. But I'm not going to go into why. That was for a different conversation. This conversation is only about trying to compare today's NFL quarterbacks with quarterbacks of yesteryear and how foolish that really is. A lot of people do it. Like there was one post about Dak Prescott trying to say how great he is and trying to make excuses for how good he is. Hey, look, I follow the Cowboys, and I'm tired of this. Cowboys, some fans always trying to push that guy in the limelight. And so his stats compared to somebody from the 70s. I've seen this with other quarterbacks as well, but especially with him. And I'm going to try to explain how crazy that is, really. Look, football today is very different than it was in the 70s, 80s, and even the 90s. Mainly because free agency and the salary cap has gotten to the point where it really affects defenses. Defenses don't get to, a great quarterback, it's a quarterback-driven league now. So a good quarterback can work eventually with the receivers he gets. But defenses lose a key piece, a pass rusher. It really affects them. You can't just plug another guy in there. That's why the defenses of yesteryear were so much better for so long, because they could stay together. The Steelers, the Cowboys, the Giants, teams like that, the Vikings, the old defenses, they could stay together for a lot of years and solidify into a great unit. Today, it's not like that. You don't know who you're going to get from year to year half the time with this free agency. So offenses have an advantage there. Number two, the game rules have changed. And they really changed in 2005 when I think it's Irsay from the Colts owner was disgusted. He didn't like the fact that the Patriots in the 2004 playoff game were banging on Peyton Manning's receivers, which was legal to do at that time. So he petitioned the league, and with all his influence, they changed the rules, and you've seen what's happened. It's become arena football. It's a very different league. So you can take any quarterback, not just Prescott, any quarterback, from starting quarterback in today's league, even on a losing team, and you throw his stats, they're probably going to be better, with a better passer rating than most of the guys from the 70s, to include Stabler, Staubach, Tarkenton, Bradshaw. That's not fair, though, because if you remember growing up, if you're old enough, remember the 70s, you remember how incredibly difficult it was to throw the football. First of all, you didn't throw the football as much because running games are much more prevalent. Nowadays, they're not as important as passing, generally speaking. And the good defenses would just shut you down. So you can't compare that at all. Probably the worst starting quarterback today on a team probably has stats equal as good as anybody from the 70s. Does that mean he's better? No. Nowadays, if you pass for less than 60%, you're a poor passer. Because anybody can complete passes now. They do all the time. Back in the day, go check the stats if you don't believe me. Go on YouTube or any search engine, whatever you want. And you will find that most of the passes did not get 60%. Staubach was considered one of the best of the 70s, was usually about 56, 57%. Stabler was like 52, 53%, and he was a hell of a winner. Bradshaw, the same thing, like 52, 53%. Tarkenton was around 56, 57. No 60% throwers back then. That not because they weren't good, it's because it was tough to complete passes. You could shadow a receiver all the way down the field, right from the start. You can't do that now. You can't fart next to a receiver without a penalty at all. So to try to do that and say that it's exactly the same. Look, also back in the day, you couldn't win a Super Bowl, 70s, 80s, even 90s. You couldn't win a Super Bowl unless you had a top-tier defense, okay? And you had a hell of a running game. You didn't have to have the best passing game. It didn't have to be one of the top passing games. It didn't. That was shown. The Steelers, well, they started to get a better passing game in the late 70s, but the Steelers, when they won their first 2 Super Bowls, Bradshaw was not among the higher passes, but they had incredible defense, that steel curtain. I still remember it. They had Franco Harris, Bly, great power running game. Dolphins, when they won their Super Bowls, they barely threw the ball in the Super Bowls. Very minimum throw, but that was one of the best rushing teams. They had 3,000 yards rushing, I think, one time between a couple of the running backs one year, which is a record. They were incredible running the ball with a great no-name defense. If you look at all the Super Bowl champions, 70s, 80s, into the 90s, there was always a very top-tier defense. Look at them all. And solid, at least in the top 10 rushing. You didn't necessarily, some had very good passers, like Montana and stuff, but not always. Look at the Cowboys when they won. Aikman was an excellent quarterback, but he didn't have to throw a lot. That was a very good defense and a fantastically powerful offensive line that counted on Emmitt Smith running the football. Nowadays, you don't have to have a great... Look at the Chiefs, the one the last couple of Super Bowls they've won. Their defense is not even half in the league. They allow a lot of points. Their running game is middling at best. But doesn't make a difference. Mahomes is so good. He makes up the difference. They win the games 35-31. He makes up, like last in the Super Bowl. There was no defense in that Super Bowl, but he makes up the difference. You don't need to have that power running game anymore. You don't need to have the best defense in the league. You got a great quarterback, and you pay all the receivers and quarterbacks. Most of your salary cap money goes anyways on that side of the ball. And you can outscore somebody and you can win. I mean, that's how football is today. It doesn't... So the quarterback they throw the ball much more too. Back in the 70s, you threw the ball 25 times. That was incredible. It wasn't uncommon to have, like Roger Staubach would complete like 12 out of 19 passes for 120 yards. That was very normal. Now you can throw 19 passes before the end of the first half. I mean, now it's 40 passes a lot of times a game. Much different football. You cannot compare the two. So much so that I have to give Peyton Manning credit. Back in 2013, when he had that record season, when they scored over 600 points, the most in NFL history, they won all the Super Bowl before they lost to a team with a defense, okay, Seattle, better than their defense. But he had 55 touchdowns and 5,500 yards, whatever it was, 5,400 yards. He broke all records. He broke the touchdown passes a year, and he broke the yards. I had to give Peyton Manning credit. I've always given him credit because he's always been a consummate professional. And he said, I'm much more impressed with when Dan Marino, because he broke, Marino was the first one to hit those type of strides in 84 when he went over 5,000 yards and had 48 touchdowns. That was, at that time, was a record. He goes, it was much more impressive when Marino did it. He said this on television because of the time period he played in. Meaning it was tougher to throw the ball back then. He's right. He's saying exactly what I'm saying. This is Peyton Manning saying after he broke a record. Being man enough to give credit and understand the difference in errors. If you put Staubach, Tarkenton, Bradshaw, Stabler, and all them in this era, they'd be throwing the same amount. Conversely, if you took those guys, Prescott and a lot of these guys that put them back then, they wouldn't be throwing what they are now. It was a different league. Right, wrong, or indifferent, you could slaughter the quarterbacks. I remember Bradshaw getting hammered in 1976. Joe Turkey Jones, I remember him from Cleveland taking him, I'm not saying slamming his head down, and he was out for the rest of the season until the playoffs. I'm not saying we should be doing that stuff and hurting people. I'm just saying it's a very different football game than it was back in those times. So to sit there and to say, well, look at the stats now and this guy, and look at this Hall of Fame player of the 70s, his stats are better. That means he's a Hall of Famer too, and he's better. No. Nonsense. Different era, different league, different style of football. It's kind of like arena football nowadays, okay? You can score 40 points apiece. That was in the 70s, you scored, if you had a 40-35 football game, that was an anomaly. Now you get them all the time. Different style of football. You might like it, you might not. That's your opinion. I don't personally, but that's just my opinion. You have a right to yours. But I'm just trying to clear up this comparing stats of quarterbacks. See what you think. I appreciate your input. God bless. Have a great day.